way to change things up. We're now joined by Brandon Marcello of 247 Sports with us on 365 Sports. Brandon, is everybody now hunky-dory and they're going to get around the campfire and hold hands?
I guess. I think a lot of people were jumping to a lot of conclusions. The ACC was about to fall apart and people were leaving. If these programs were going to break the grant of rights and leave, it would have happened by now. This is something that's been explored for more than a year by a lot of these programs. In fact, practically every program in the ACC has been to Greensboro, North Carolina, or now Charlotte, North Carolina, to look at the grant of rights and to study them. And there's no movement as of right now for the 7 reported schools or any others to leave the conference or anything along those lines. I do think, though, that the timing of it certainly expedites the idea of doing and adopting a weighted revenue model, which would favor the likes of the Florida States and the Clemsons based on their postseason success. And I could tell you, I just got done speaking to Florida State Athletics Director Michael Alford about that, and I asked him, what kind of extra money are we talking about here? Is it negligible? Are you actually going to be able to close the gap to $30 million, maybe more dollars compared to the SEC and the Big Ten? And he said there's not really a way to close that gap, but based solely off postseason success, we're talking about playoff appearance, NCAA tournament appearances, and things of that sort. You could potentially earn, as a program, an additional $10 million as a program. So yearly. Again, that's a third of where you want to get when you're trying to compare yourself to the SEC and Big Ten, but that's a step in the right direction. And Alford also says he is confident that the ACC is going to be able to drive up some new revenue streams. What that entails is not known, but is being explored, he said.
They'll get into Bitcoin, Brandon. That's how they'll do it. They can't. They are in a position where clearly you mentioned the grant of rights. Everybody's looked at it because not only it's not just about leaving. It would be about just renegotiating a media deal with ESPN to bring up to fair market price or what they thought was fair market price, even though ESPN has no motivation to do that for more than a decade.
Yeah, and this, again, when we're talking about revenue distribution, it's coming solely off the college football playoff pot of money when it expands to 12 teams here in the near future and starting here next year. This extra money is not going to necessarily come from the TV revenue and not necessarily be able to say, hey, Florida State, for example, drives TV ratings more so than any other team in the football season in the ACC. So maybe they deserve an extra $5 million on top of that? That could be argued. But right now, that's not gaining a lot of traction, that discussion and a model including that. So we'll see, but I just don't see how that is ever going to be involved when it comes to ESPN money, and for that matter, ESPN having to get involved in anything.
So, Brandon, yesterday it looked like all hell was breaking loose. Today you've got FSU like, hey, we're thrilled to be here. Everything's great. Just what was the feeling kind of like? I mean, did it seem like a situation where there was a little bit of uptightness amongst the peers, or did it seem like just sort of business as usual?
Yeah, there's some uptightness, especially last night when the rumors were going around about the 7 schools maybe banding together, which wasn't true. But, they came into these meetings knowing that they were going to discuss the revenue model, but also they didn't quite know what to expect what those revenue models would entail. And they also, surely, the other schools in that room probably felt threatened by Florida State and Clemson and others by the way they were coming in going, hey, we want to talk about revenue models more so than anything else going on in this room. In fact, Alford, FSU's AD, told us here a few minutes ago, he goes, I don't, sure we're discussing everything else, but number one on my mind right now coming to these meetings is revenue. And how do we get more money? That was his number one thing. And so that's not on the top priority list for all these other programs. It's important, but I think a lot of people were probably kind of taken aback a little bit by that yesterday.
How long do you think, though, even with this increased revenue, that everybody can look across the state at their rivals. And this is really Florida State and Clemson in particular here, because they're the ones who win the league in football more often than anybody else does by a large margin, and see Florida making 2 to 3 times as much as they are. Miami probably feels the same way. Clemson's looking at South Carolina making 2 to 3 times as much as they are, and really be happy with that for longer than a few years if they cannot make even more gains over the next couple of years to cut into that $30 million gap.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, my headphones are going out here and out here, but I guess, can you summarize what you just said there? I was breaking out. Sorry, man.
How long do you think that Florida State and Clemson can look across the state at their rivals making twice as much as they do, and really be happy with just the $10 million?
I think I even mentioned to Michael Alfred, how much of this is just kicking the can down the road? Because remember, the SEC and other conferences are going to go back to the negotiation table with ESPN and others in like 2030. The ACC's locked in their deal with ESPN until 2036. And Alford said, yeah, in some ways this is kicking the can down the road, and they're going to have to continue evaluating how to get more money in the conference through other means. And as he told me, this is just the first bridge they're crossing with a weighted distribution model. And now it's about, after that, and figuring that out and getting that adopted, how do we get more money in the conference to potentially add on top of that? That's several years probably down the road.
Brandon, is there any concern from those who may not get the revenue they thought because of an unequal revenue sharing model? Does this ever end well?
Well, I say this. It didn't end well in the Southwest Conference.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't end well really in the Big 12 with Oklahoma and Texas getting more money than everybody else. And for that matter, it just doesn't set well in the room when it comes to decisions being made, because certain programs obviously have more power, even without having to say it, because they're getting the more money. And so, no, I don't. History shows us this doesn't really ever end well if you're giving more money to people. The idea, and I guess the theory behind this, is that you're paying them extra based on their postseason success. So, for example, Wake Forest, they're very successful in football. They would, in this model, be getting more money than they do now. And Dave Clawson, the Wake Forest coach, was telling me earlier today, we welcome it. Let's do this weighted distribution model because we're going to keep winning games at Wake Forest. I am confident in that. But if you're Boston College, they're not so maybe happy about that. But again, I think that the thing that's being hammered home, if they're figuring out a way to keep the baseline pay, which is $36 million per team each year, if that stays the same no matter what, no matter how successful or how much of a failure you are in the postseason, then nothing really changes for anybody else. It's just they're going to get more money out of the playoff pile when that expands. So in essence, I'm just throwing numbers out there.
Sure.
They get paid $36 million a year now. When the playoff expands, let's say that goes to $40 million a year. Well, it would actually just end up staying at $36 million a year on the baseline, and the teams that are more successful are the ones getting a larger share of that playoff money.
Is there a chance that some schools were barking to kind of get attention or even maybe to throw up a flare?
Yes, absolutely.
And then they got behind closed doors in front of everybody else, and they were not neutered but kind of scolded a little bit?
Well, I think everybody was scolded a little bit yesterday. Based on the conversations I've had, I think that they were all told, well, for one, don't talk to media after all this yesterday. This is, we're not dealing with this right now. And I also think a lot of people were told, we got to get in line. We got to get on the same page with all this. Because really, again, there's no legitimate immediate threat of any of these programs leaving. The Grant of Rights is as solid as anything in college athletics right now. And in an ever-changing world, it's amazing to be able to say that in college athletics. But again, talking to industry sources, if Florida State or Clemson or anybody wanted to leave the ACC right now, we're not just talking about a $120 million buyout. We're talking about other things on top of that. And we're talking about them potentially, because of their TV rights and all the games being owned by the conference and then through ESPN, $500 million. who's getting that money to leave and go to the SEC if the SEC wants you? And again, if this is hypothetical, a type of hypothetical, remember, ESPN owns the exclusive rights for everything in the ACC and everything in the SEC starting next year, this upcoming season. So why would ESPN sit there and go, we don't really want to be a part of this where you're just switching cups? Florida State, you're still going to be on ESPN, but now we're having to deal with the ACC and how we're distributing this money, and are they losing the money on this? And then all of a sudden we're involved potentially in a legal battle of some sort. That's just, it's messy beyond even the money that's at stake.
Brandon, thanks for your time. I know it's been a busy day, busy couple of days on what's happening with the ACC. We appreciate your time and jumping on with us when you could.
All right. Thanks, guys.
You
Appreciate
too.
it.
Brandon Marcello, Ross Dellinger, back-to-back here.